Well, hi everybody. So today we're going to have a look at Aeroplane Heaven's Grumman F3F. We'll, look around the cockpit, do a couple other things, and take it off, fly it around, and then do a short review on it. That'll pretty much be it for today, so let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, before we go any further, hopefully I'm going to save some of you some time and money. I would just skip the F3F. It has a game-breaking bug that comes along with it, and I don't know what the probability is that you will end up with that bug, which is why I'm going to suggest skipping it. Now, I am going to go through what that bug is and a workaround for it in case you have purchased it and would like to actually fly it. Then go over a couple other problems with it and do a review because that is pretty much what I do here. As far as what the bug is, if you have the F3F selected as your plane when you click departure, it will crash to desktop. Now, the workaround for this is to select any plane other than the F3F and set the departure, flight plan, whatever you do normally, and then before clicking fly, go back and reselect the F3F. It should load into the game fine this way. It's worked for me every single time since using this method. Now, this is something I'm more than likely going to repeat throughout this review, but the F3F has been out for over a year now, and it is on update 1.3, and these problems still persist. There are a few more problems, which I'm going to go through next, but my suggestion is to pretty much just skip this one. Well, continuing on here, we're going to move into the cockpit, and we're going to have a look at some of the problems in the cockpit here. Now, to start off with, we have this panel over here on the right side of the cockpit with all these switches. The click points for any of these switches are really off. They don't line up with the switch with the exception of the alternator and the ground power. But I'm not entirely sure if there's some reason that necessitates offsetting these click points so much, but either way, to actually access the click points, you're going to be clicking over here pretty much along the left edge of the panel itself to actually make any of these work. Now, some of these have duplicates. So, for instance, some of the interior lighting you can activate with the knobs over here, and the battery itself you can activate with the battery knob up here. The next thing we're going to talk about here is going to be the two options that you have for your starter. So you have a electric start and you have a cartridge start. Now, depending upon how you want to look at this, either it's mislabeled or the switch itself is backwards. It's up to you to make the decision on which one of those it is. But for the most part, all I'm going to say is that if you put this thing in the up position, that's going to be a cartridge start, and if you put this thing in the lower position, that's going to be an electric start. It's mislabeled inside the cockpit. Depending upon how you want to read the mouse hint here, it's telling you where it is, not what you're going to select. But again, it's up to you to make that decision on which one of those it is. So move over here to the left side of the cockpit. Now, this one just happens to be an unfortunate placement for everything. This area of the cockpit is rather cluttered. So when you have to access this like lock pin for the little gear switch here, you sometimes run into a problem where you're going to have to engage the supercharger, put it into high, so that you can actually click on some of these things. Now, this one is a little bit more hit or miss than the others. Sometimes it's not a big deal, sometimes it is, but it tends to create a little bit of a problem here. This may have been a candidate to actually offset a click point just so it would make it a little bit easier from the default camera position. Now, that's pretty much all of the bugs that I'm going to go over in this one. This may not be the full extent of all the bugs with this plane. I don't know. These are pretty much all the ones that I've been experiencing with it. There may be more. Now, I did want to point out that this thing has been out for over a year now, and none of these things have been fixed. I know that I'm not the only one that is having these problems with this plane, and I know I'm not the only one still having the problems with this plane. So, all these things are something to take into consideration when purchasing this plane, and it's the reason I actually put this up front so that you guys didn't have to waste your time watching the rest of this if this is a total deal breaker for you, which I honestly wouldn't blame you if it is. So, for those of you that want to watch the rest of the review, it's going to start here pretty much after this. For those of you that have decided not to purchase this thing after watching all this, thanks for watching. I hope you found it at least a little bit useful. And we'll move on to the regular review now. Alrighty, well, here we are in the F3F. We're going to take a quick look around the cockpit. Now, overall, I think the model quality on this one came out pretty good. I think where this thing leaves a little bit to be desired is going to end up being on the textures, but as far as the model goes, didn't really notice any gaps or anything like that. Everything seems to line up fairly well, except for maybe a few points here or there. Probably the most glaringly obvious problem with this one is that the light is going to shine through the model quite a bit, and some of the shadows appear rather grainy. But other than that, I think the textures, for the most part, are kind of hit or miss. they do a really nice job of making things look worn, and it does look really good where they've sort of worn things. Some of it looks brand new. Some of it kind of ends up looking like real shiny new plastic, and really cheap plastic at that. As far as what you're going to notice, probably when you're flying, it's probably not going to be that bad, with the exception maybe of these rivets up here on the frame of the canopy. And when we go ahead and close the canopy here, there are going to be a few that, unfortunately, probably once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them. But the texture here on these rivets and things like that, they don't come out very well, and the camera tends to intersect the model a little bit up here on the frame of the canopy. So, you know, it's by far nowhere near the worst thing I've ever seen. It's not the best looking thing I've ever seen. It leaves a little bit to be desired, but you know, it's not that bad. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get this thing started and get it off the ground here. Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead and get this thing started. The first thing we're going to want to do is turn the battery on. When we turn that knob, it will go ahead and turn on the battery switch over here on this panel. We'll go ahead and flip the alternator on, and then we'll come over here to the left side of the cockpit. We'll make sure that we have put the mixture up to rich. We'll go ahead and crack the throttle a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and flip the magnetos over to both. Now, as far as the primer goes, you don't have to worry about it. It's not necessary. But as long as we're over here, we're going to go ahead and uncover the starter button. And we're going to come down here. Now, there are two ways to start this thing. One is going to be an electric start. The other one is going to be the cartridge start. I'm going to start this thing with the cartridge because I think it's a little bit faster. Either way, in an effort to not confuse anybody, when this knob is in the up position, you're doing a cartridge start. If it's in the down position, you're doing an electric start. So we're going to go ahead and set this up for a cartridge start, so it should be in the up position. And then we'll come up here to the button, the starter button, and we'll just go ahead and press it one time. It'll go ahead and start up. Now, if you're going to do an electric start, you're going to have to hold this button down until the motor actually turns over. So it's probably going to crank a couple of times, and then it will actually catch and turn over, and then it'll start. I prefer the cartridge just because it's pretty much instantaneous. Now, obviously the sound set on this one leaves a little bit to be desired, and that might be a bit of a charitable assessment. Either way, we've got the thing going. Looks like we're going to head out to the grass here and take this thing off. Alrighty, well, here we are in the grass, so we're going to go ahead and take this thing off. Now, before we do, there's a couple things I'm going to talk about. One of which, this plane is an incredibly docile plane on the ground. There's really not much for you to worry about, with maybe the exception of a strong crosswind and overcorrecting on your rudder. If you happen to overcorrect, it might get a little squirrely on you, but other than that, there's not really anything to worry about. So we're going to go ahead and release the parking brake here. Go ahead and throttle up. We're looking for something around about 70 miles an hour before we can lift off. Go ahead and put the gear up. Now, for whatever reason you've decided that you want to use the landing gear crank here inside the cockpit, there are a couple of steps you're probably going to have to go through before you can use that thing. One of which you're probably going to have to engage the supercharger so you can access this lock pin over here. Now, this switch over here called gear, that says gear enabled, you're going to have to move this into the corresponding position that you want to move the gear into. So, for instance, if we want to put the gear down, we need to make sure this switch is in the down position, and then we can go ahead and lower the gear. If we want to retract the gear, we need to make sure this is in the up position. We can go ahead and retract the gear. And that's pretty much how that thing works. Now, that really only applies if you're going to use the landing gear crank inside the cockpit. If you're going to use the keybind shortcut, whatever you want to call it, for toggle gear up and down, that does not apply. You don't have to do that. Now, it is a little bit unfortunate that this plane is so broken, because it is quite a fun thing to fly, and I probably would fly it a lot more if it was in a better state than it currently is. Either way, in terms of how it flies, it has an okay roll rate. It's kind of slow. It has a little bit of a trouble completing a roll. You're probably going to have to put some rudder into it to get it to complete the roll. It climbs okay. It's reasonably fast for what it is. You can get it going pretty quick. Otherwise, there's not really too much to worry about with it either. There's no engine damage, so you can pretty much cook the engine, and you don't have to worry about anything happening to it. So you just full throttle it if you want. You can fly it however you want. Again, it is a little bit unfortunate the way it is. It has a pretty low stall speed. I think it's somewhere around about 45 miles an hour. And don't be alarmed by what you're seeing on your screen right now, but we have crossed into the 8th circle of hell. Now we're going to try and climb out of here. Sometimes that results in the engine dying, sometimes it does not. It did not. Well, that's... Did it? No, we're good. Alright. So, for whatever reason that happens, you can fly through the ground. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to fly all the way back to the airfield. I think we're just going to land in that field over there. Again, it's a pretty easy thing to land. So we'll just need to make sure that we're touching down somewhere around about 70 miles an hour, and you should be okay with it. Probably going to be landing with the tailwind here, but that's not a big deal. Go ahead and put the gear down. You could probably land anywhere down to about 60 miles an hour, but do be careful about it. The stall speed for this thing is somewhat, let's say, wonky. Sometimes it seems to stall closer to 45. Sometimes it'll stall at like 55, so just be aware of that. Alright, we'll go ahead and ground the tail wheel here. Bring the thing to a complete stop, because it does have very good brakes, and we'll give it that. Alrighty, well, we have taken the plane off. We've flown the plane around for a little bit. We came in here and landed in a random field. We also visited the 8th Circle of Hell, because this plane is kind of a portal to hell. Alrighty, well, if you would like to purchase Aeroplane Heaven's Portal to Hell, it's about $28. And if you are going to purchase it, I would shop around to find the lowest price, or wait for a sale. It certainly does have its fair share of problems. I won't be completely negative about the F3F. There are some things I do like about this plane. The interior and exterior model quality is quite good. There may be a few things here or there that aren't perfect. A couple of points in the interior where the canopy frame doesn't join the fuselage nicely, and on the exterior I'm going to go with where the struts meet the upper and lower wings. Doesn't look all that great. What I do think looks absolutely fantastic on this plane is the engine. As far as the textures go, they're a bit of a hit or miss. I think the exterior texturing came out much better than the interior did. I'm going to point out the engine again, but I do think it looks great. The other thing I did want to say about the exterior before I move on to the next category is the way the metal looks on the fuselage. It looks like it's been formed to the frame. Not exactly sure if that's the right terminology or not. I think the exterior rivets came out pretty good too, with the exception of looking at them from a few specific angles. Overall, I think the exterior is borderline great looking. It's such a shame about the rest of the plane, because I think it could have been a pretty good one. Now we're going to talk about the sound effects. As far as the quality goes, I think it's quite good. And I'm going to stress what I mean by quality. I do not mean that this thing sounds like the real F3F. What I mean is that in terms of the sounds that come through the speakers, I think it sounds fine. That is devoid of how realistic it is. Unfortunately, the sound effects, in general, are somewhat generic. This thing certainly does not sound like the real F3F, which tends to be a constant with Aeroplane Heaven. They do not do a very good job with engine sounds. Now, I'm not very musically inclined, so this may be a bad analogy, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's almost as if they get the right notes, but they mess up the tone and pitch of everything. They are missing some of the more subtle sounds you hear when the real one starts up, and I'm going to move on to something else that happens quite often on this plane. A lot of the sound effects have a very hard stop. An example of this would be the cranking engine does not bleed smoothly into the sound of the running engine. It just cuts off, and it's rather noticeable. And that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it on the sounds. The quality comes through the speakers fine. It's just the rest of it doesn't sound very good. As far as how this thing flies, once it's in the air, I really like it. It's predictable, it's smooth, it kind of has a heavy feel to it. It might be a little bit too easy to take off and land. I guess I was just expecting the 950 horsepower engine to kick the plane a little bit more when I go straight to full throttle. But overall, it's really a pretty fun plane to fly. Again, it's a shame about the rest of the problems with this plane because I really do enjoy flying it around. Now, I'm not going to go back through all of the problems with this plane. I covered most of those at the beginning of this video, so I'm just going to move on to the conclusion, which is I would stay away from this one, given the number of bugs and its price. Now, if they could fix the crash to desktop problem and knock the price down to around $15 or below, with the rest of the bugs intact, I might not have that much of a problem with it. I was a little surprised by the lack of features in this one. Aeroplane Heaven usually has at least a few features, so I don't know, maybe I missed them. In its current state, I cannot recommend the F3F. I know this is over a year late, but it might help somebody. One last thing here before I sign off is do not nose plant this plane. It will fall through the ground. And that's pretty much it for today, guys, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. So we're I don't know, we're upside down. I actually think we're taxiing on underside of the world here. Yeah, we're taxiing on the underside of the world. This plane has some problems. All right. Well,